You're lying in bed right now. Maybe it's late. Maybe you've got a window cracked open, and somewhere outside you can hear it. Rain tapping against glass, pooling in gutters, drumming softly on the roof above your head. It's one of the most comforting sounds a human being can experience. You pull the blanket a little higher, feel the warmth trapped against your skin, and the rain becomes almost musical. A lullaby written by weather. Now erase the roof, erase the walls, the blanket, the glass, the gutter. Erase everything built after the year 1900, after the year 1000, after the year 10,000 BCE. You're standing in an open grassland in what is now southern France 30,000 years ago, wearing the skin of a dead animal, and the sky has been pouring water on you for 6 straight days. You are not cozy, you're dying. So the question is simple. For over 200,000 years, with no waterproof fabrics, no concrete, no drainage systems, no weather forecasts, how did ancient humans survive when it rained for weeks? Here's the thing nobody thinks about when they picture rain in prehistory. Rain doesn't kill you by drowning you. It kills you by stealing your heat. Water conducts warmth away from your body 25 times faster than air. That's not a metaphor. That's thermodynamics measured at Princeton's Outdoor Action program and confirmed by every cold water survival study ever published. What this means is brutally straightforward. A dry human in 50-degree air can survive for hours. A wet human in that same air can be hypothermic in under 60 minutes. Your core temperature drops below 95 degrees Fahrenheit. Your muscles stop responding. Your brain slows. Your heart eventually quits. And it doesn't even need to be freezing. It just needs to be wet and cool and continuous. So rain wasn't an inconvenience for your ancestors. It was a slow-motion predator, and the longer it lasted, the more lethal it became, because wet wood won't burn, wet ground won't insulate, wet skin won't hold warmth, and a wet body can't hunt. Think about that for a second. Every rainstorm that lasted more than a few days was a compound emergency. Heat loss, fire loss, food loss, all accelerating at once, which means the first problem wasn't getting dry. It was staying warm while wet. And the answer is older than our species. At Contrebandiers Cave in Morocco, archaeologist Emily Hallett and her team uncovered bone tools dated to roughly 120,000 years ago. Tools whose wear marks showed they were used specifically for scraping animal hides and processing fur. That's not decoration. That's survival engineering. The hide of a large mammal, when scraped properly, creates a material that doesn't just block wind, it sheds water. Animal fat, naturally embedded in the skin, acts as a hydrophobic barrier. Your ancestors weren't waiting for rain to soak them and then reacting. They were wearing the rain off before it ever touched their skin, and it gets more sophisticated. Neanderthals, those supposedly brutish cousins we keep underestimating, were producing birch bark tar as early as 200,000 years ago. Birch bark tar is a sticky, dark adhesive made by heating birch bark in the absence of oxygen. A 2021 study published in Exarch Journal showed that when this tar was applied to stitched seams in hide clothing, it simultaneously sealed the needle holes, waterproofed the joint, and protected the thread from rot. They weren't just making clothes. They were engineering weatherproof garments with a substance they had to chemically manufacture through a process called dry distillation. 200,000 years ago, but even the best clothing has limits. When rain goes from days to weeks, you need architecture. You need something between you and the sky. Here's what doesn't make sense until you think about it. Ancient humans didn't invent shelters because of rain. They already had shelters. What rain did was test those shelters, expose the bad designs, and reward the good ones until only the truly effective structures survived in the archaeological record. At the site of Ohalo II, on the southwest shore of the Sea of Galilee in Israel, archaeologist Danny Nadell uncovered 6 oval brush huts dating to 23,000 years ago. These structures were 9 to 16 feet long, built from interlocking tree branches and brushwood. And here's the critical detail: they could be constructed in just a few hours. They weren't permanent architecture. They were rapid deployment weather systems. When the rains came and a camp flooded, you didn't need 2 weeks to build shelter. You needed an afternoon. The design was deceptively clever. Oval shapes shed water naturally, no flat surfaces for pooling. Branches angled downward meant rain ran off the exterior, like a thatched roof before thatching was even a word. And the huts at Ohalo too had their hearths placed outside, not inside, which tells us something profound. These people understood that smoke ventilation and fire management were separate problems from rain protection. They didn't try to solve everything with one structure. They specialized. Go further back, and you find even more dramatic solutions. At Moldova, one in eastern Ukraine, a 44,000-year-old site near the Dniester River, Neanderthals built a circular structure out of mammoth bones. Not because mammoth bones were the best building material, they're heavy, unwieldy, awkward, but because in a treeless steppe environment during an ice age, mammoth bones were the only rigid framework available. Hides draped over those bones created walls. The structure was roughly 26 feet in diameter, large enough for a family group, sturdy enough to survive a season. But shelter and clothing only solve 2 of the 4 problems rain creates. The third is fire, and fire in rain is perhaps the most critical challenge your ancestors ever faced. Fire wasn't just warmth. Fire was everything. It was cooking, which unlocked calories from tough meat and toxic plants. It was light, which extended productive hours. It was protection from predators. It was the social center of every human group for hundreds of thousands of years. And rain is fire's mortal enemy. A single heavy storm could extinguish the one thing standing between a group of 20 humans and slow starvation. Here's the part nobody talks about. Your ancestors didn't just know how to start fires. They knew how to keep them alive. Ethnographic studies of modern hunter-gatherer groups, the Sand People of Southern Africa, indigenous Australians, Amazonian tribes, reveal a near-universal behavior: fire transportation, smoldering coals wrapped in green leaves, packed in clay-lined bark containers, carried from camp to camp like the most precious cargo in the world. Because it was. In wet conditions, starting a new fire from scratch using friction methods is nearly impossible. The wood is damp, the tinder won't catch, the air itself fights you, so you don't let the fire die, ever. Archaeological evidence supports this. At sites across the Dordogne region of France, including Abri Pataude, a rock shelter occupied continuously from 35,000 to 20,000 years ago, hearth layers show repeated sustained burning across stratigraphic levels that span thousands of years. These weren't people casually striking sparks. These were people maintaining fire as an inherited resource, passed from generation to generation, the way we pass down property deeds. And when rain made open fires impossible, they moved them under stone overhangs, into cave mouths, beneath deliberate wind walls built from stacked stones. At Terra Amata in Nice, France, a site excavated by Henry de Lumley in 1966, dating to roughly 380,000 years ago, researchers found low walls of beach stones placed specifically to the northwest of fire pits, positioned to block the Mistral wind. These people weren't just reacting to weather. They were reading prevailing wind patterns and engineering their fire installations accordingly. Nearly 400,000 years ago, pine resin made it even more resilient. Resin-soaked wood, fat wood, burns even when wet because the volatile oils in pine pitch ignite at temperatures far below what's needed for dry hardwood. Your ancestors knew which trees bled resin. They knew how to harvest it, store it, and use it as a fire starter and a slow-burning fuel source when everything else was soaked through. This wasn't luck. This was curriculum. Taught, learned, remembered, improved. The fourth problem is the one that creeps in after everything else is handled. You've got shelter, you've got clothing, you've got fire, but you still need to eat. And rain changes the food landscape completely. Large game animals don't stop existing during rain, but they do change behavior. They cluster under tree cover, move to higher ground, become harder to track, because rain washes away scent trails and hoof prints within hours. Hunting parties that relied on tracking suddenly went blind. So your ancestors pivoted. At Ohalo too, those same 23,000-year-old huts contained over 90,000 seeds for more than 100 plant species. Wild barley, brome grass, millet, stored against the walls, clustered around a grinding stone embedded in the floor of Hut 1. These people were stockpiling, not farming. That wouldn't come for another 11,000 years, but deliberately gathering, processing, and storing plant foods in quantities that could sustain a group through periods when hunting failed. Fish became critical. The Ohalo 2 site sits on a lakeshore for a reason. Fish don't care about rain. If anything, rain raises water levels, floods new shallows, and drives fish into areas where they're easier to catch with traps and weirs. Your ancestors weren't randomly choosing campsites. They were positioning themselves near resources that stayed available when rain shut down everything else. The hundreds of fish bones found at Ohalo 2 aren't coincidence. They're strategy. And here's the deeper insight buried in all of this. Rain didn't just threaten human survival. It drove human innovation. Every one of the technologies that eventually built civilization, waterproof materials, engineered structures, food storage, resource planning, chemical manufacturing, reading weather patterns, has a direct ancestor in the solutions your forebears invented to survive wet weeks in the open. Think about what that means. The rain that terrified them also taught them. It selected for the groups that planned ahead, that cooperated, that communicated knowledge across generations. The bands that couldn't keep fire alive, that didn't stockpile food, that built shelters rain could collapse. They disappeared. Not dramatically, quietly. One failed winter, one lost fire, one week too many in the cold and wet, gone. Winter came at your ancestors with 4 weapons: the cold that stole their heat, the water that killed their fire, the blindness that hid their prey, and the time that starved their bodies. And they answered each one. Waterproof hides engineered with birch tar and animal fat, shelters built in hours from brushwood or in days from mammoth bone, fires guarded like children, moved under stone, fed with resin, never allowed to die, and food gathered, stored, ground, cached beside lakeshores where fish swam regardless of sky. They didn't just survive rain, they used it as a curriculum. Every prolonged storm was a final exam in cooperation, planning, material science, and memory. The groups that passed didn't just live, they became us. You're still lying in bed. The rain is still falling. But now maybe you hear it differently. Not as background noise, not as ambiance from a sleep app. That sound killed people for 200,000 years. It killed the ones who couldn't plan, couldn't build, couldn't cooperate, couldn't keep a flame alive through the longest night. You survived it because they did first.